Welcome to 48 Hours of Buddy Movies, the podcast where we explore the influence of 48 hours on action cinema, one buddy movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is 48 Hours.
It's a buddy movie with a cop and a con. I gotta tell you, when you said the influence of buddy movies, I went, whoa, we're doing a different podcast.
You had a little moment?
I had a moment where I was like, this, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Right,
Kansas being Die Hard on a Blank.
Indeed. This is our new show, our flagship edition of the new subscriber-only show, but we're giving you the first two for free. Yeah, here we are, the new show. We should just lay the table a little bit for our listeners,
for the holiday
right?
guests, for our guests.
Welcome
in.
Help
the
yourself.
bar is over there.
Have some eggnog. Hope you don't get shot by Gary Busey as you're drinking
I know
it
it's
from
weird
a helicopter.
that Martin Riggs is drinking a beer at 7:45 in the morning.
Don't worry about it.
But that's just how he
the
rolls.
Gang's all here.
He's had a tough couple of years.
Yeah. So obviously the concept of the show is 48 hour-long, approximately, episodes.
Yeah, don't hold us to that.
Don't hold us to that.
Don't hold us
you get the gist.
Don't hold us to any of the 48 stuff.
Yeah. But, it's a good concept, isn't it? It's a good hook.
It's a good hook.
48 hour-long episodes about 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the movie we're discussing today, the classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 smash hit action comedy thriller, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy. So that's the concept of the show. And then as we have done with Die Hard on a Blank, we're going to track it genealogically. We start with 48 Hours, and then we're going to track chronologically all the other films that were influenced by the original, the OG classic. But I also thought it'd be worth, as we did when we started out, Die Hard wasn't the first ever action movie, right?
No.
There were things that preceded it, but I think similarly, 48 Hours was kind of a paradigm shift within the subgenre. So I think worth just taking a moment talking about defining our terms a little bit, like what is a buddy movie and so forth, and the specific kinds that we'll be discussing. I think the buddy movie genre, or the idea of the two-hander, goes back to
for a long
the
time.
beginning of cinema, right? Like Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy, Martin and Lewis, and more specifically, like films from the late 60s or 70s, such as Butch and Sundance, right? Easy Rider, The Sting, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot is one that's often cited. I actually didn't realize until recently that was a Michael Cimino movie.
Yes,
that had
it is.
slipped me. That kind of slipped. That had passed me by.
What year is that one? Do you remember?
I think it's either 74 or 76.
I won't hold you to it, but okay.
Sort of mid 70s, crime movie with Clint Eastwood and a young Jeff Bridges. And then you could argue like All the President's Men is kind of like a detective buddy movie or two-hander in some ways.
Totally.
But the one that's most often cited is as a sort of precursor for 48 Hours is Freebie and the Bean, which was the Richard Rush action comedy with James Caan and Alan Arkin.
That's a really popular movie here. I feel like it screens at the New Beverly like once a year. Like,
is that right?
Yeah, I didn't really know that it existed until I moved to LA. But then I was like, what the hell is Freebie and the Bean? And everyone was talking about it. I think I went to one of the screenings. I was like, okay, this is like a fun movie. But like it's gaining a reputation again in some strange way. Maybe because of James Caan's, passing. People are sort of looking beyond The Godfather and the stuff.
But I think the difference with all these films, there are a couple of others that are relevant, are like Stir Crazy and Silver Streak, because Richard Pryor was considered for this part of the Reggie Hammond part in its earlier iteration. At one
he did
point,
a couple buddy movies too.
Yeah, it's not. We're not. 48 Hours wasn't the first buddy movie, right? But what it did, I would suggest, is like, it kind of bridged the 70s and the 80s,
right,
and created this new paradigm, because 48 Hours is also like it's short. It's
you mean
96,
in terms of length?
It's 96 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like elevated fast food in a sense, as opposed to these meandering 70s pictures that tend to be there's more air in them. They take their time. They're more sort of languid and meandering, right? This is sort of like fast, furious, in your face, foul-mouthed funny. Takes some of the abrasiveness of those 70s movies, but kind of puts it in a new, slick, shiny package.
Exactly.
Right?
What I was going to say is that like one of the things this is the genre that I came of age with. And we can talk more about that later. But I think one thing that, growing up, I think this is less true, but when you're a kid, and I know this is true for you too, a lot of the stuff that you watch is the stuff that your parents watched, right?
Yes.
Like discoverability was not a thing when you were a kid. You would
for our generation,
you would just like watch stuff.
4 channels, and
exactly.
limited.
Right.
Like you couldn't even buy videos for a time. Right?
You couldn't buy them, and you'd have to rent them, and you'd wait months for them to come out.
Yeah, and a movie premiering on TV was a big deal,
huge deal. And so I'm watching stuff that my dad watched, but my dad was obviously in his 30s and the 70s. So like there's this thing that happens where like some of the ideas and the aesthetics of the 70s and the sort of independent film movement that you could argue begins with Easy Rider crash into the studios being like, we're taking control of the car again, right? So you have this like interesting combo of sort of like guys influenced by 70s cinema now starting to make these much more studio-driven kind of pictures. And the result is this like really fascinating mishmash that goes well into the era that we're currently exploring on Die Hard on a Blank. And I would say kind of starts to end in the early 2000s, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of stuff got through in these movies that didn't necessarily get through in other genres.
And I think it's similar to Die Hard and how we've tracked that influence, although it had the Die Hard on a Blank genre. Its heyday really was the 90s.
Yeah.
But they're still making that movie.
Yeah.
That paradigm still exists. And I think similarly with 48 Hours, people refer back to this paradigm. I mean, I'm in studio meetings frequently where this is still cited. And even the Safdie brothers, up until recently, were exploring a remake of it.
Yes.
I've now read that it's since evolved into something else, and it's not going to be that. But that speaks to its enduring legacy.
Yeah.
As the definitive modern, action buddy movie. That's really, and also another important distinction I think to make is like, it's as opposed to maybe the Richard Pryor, Gene Wilder movies that are, and to some extent Freebie and the Beam, which is sort of like slapsticky but with a hard edge. This is a thriller. This is a hard-boiled noirish action thriller that is suddenly in. Eddie Murphy's not in the movie for 25 minutes. The first 25 minutes are just a hard-ass Walter Hill badass thriller.
Is it time for me to give you my pitch on the beginning of the movie?
As opposed to, just to finish this point, as opposed to a straight comedy, right? Like this is a action thriller first. It just happens to be hilariously funny. And I think that's important because we're probably not going to do as many of the sort of spoofy movies. Like we've been discussing, should we do Dragnet, for example, right? Which is more of a spoof, or 21 Jump Street, and the great movies, but they're out and out comedies with a thriller element, as opposed to the movies that I think we're more excited to discuss because they're more thematically rich.
Harder edge too.
Yes, like To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, and so forth, right?
Well,
sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, a movie I thought of along those lines was Loose Cannons. You remember that with Dan Aykroyd and Gene Hackman?
Really badly regarded movie.
Yes, but it's kind of like the logical conclusion of this kind of product, where it's like, what is good about 48 Hours? And a lot of these movies in this period is like...
I'm glad you asked. We're going to unpack that.
They're not quite comedies. They're not quite thrillers. I would say this leans into thriller. There's this mishmash, right? Where they cast Nick Nolte as the like John Wayne kind of figure, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to look at him historically.
Yeah, interesting.
And then next to him, they put... one of the funniest men to ever exist. But they're not requiring Eddie Murphy to be funny. It just so happens that, I mean, he is funny and he brings humor to it, but he's doing drama, he's doing comedy, he's doing both in this movie. And it's like amazing to watch, right? And I think that's kind of what's exciting about it is that this era there's a lot going on politically in this era and culturally and all these things. It's the Reagan era, crucially post-Vietnam, although this movie is not does
Doesn't
not
really
talk about
touch on it,
Vietnam, but
unlike
it's coming.
Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, it's coming. And what I think is so interesting about this movie, so I didn't grow up with this movie in the way that you did. I saw it like maybe once. I've now watched it 2 or 3 times, but like you can feel the paradigm shift with this movie, and you can still feel the genre figuring itself out throughout like the first 10 of these, so to speak.
Well, that's what we'll go on to track, because, you know, we'll see like films like Beverly Hills Cop, the Lethal Weapon series, the Stakeout movies, Tango and Cash,
right?
Alien Nation, Red
fist
Heat,
pumping.
And then into the 90s, you've got films, The Hard Way, The Rookie, Point Break, of course, Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
Yes, we couldn't miss it.
And like you're sort of saying, there's an element like with Alien Nation, or to some extent Harley Davidson, there's a sort of hybridization that's like, what if we make it sci-fi?
Right.
What if we make it kind of like a pulp graphic novel?
Right.
You know, but ultimately the paradigm is established and kind of perfected, I would say, with this movie.
Another thing that I just thought of when you were talking there is there's also the like social concerns of like, you know, I don't think we're covering it. Well, we're covering Black Rain, but Black Rain and Rising Sun share this quality. Rising Sun being like a kind of buddy movie.
Absolutely. And I thought about doing that for Die Hard because it's a Japanese corporation in LA. So we might get to do it here because I love that movie, actually.
Yeah, I like it too. And one thing it's dealing with is the fear of the Japanese and the economic issues in the early 90s, really. Like, so these movies do reflect their times, right? And 48 Hours does. There's a lot of racial animus to talk about in this movie and all this cultural stuff. So there's still this substantive quality to action movies in this era. Yeah. Not that there isn't now to some extent, but I think that these movies are, because of their realism, and because VFX are not quite like there yet, right? Like they're not trying to make these big action movies like that have a lot of sci-fi elements, even though some of these are sci-fis. They're still like gritty, down home.
It's dudes
realistic.
With guns in urban environments. It's car chases, it's shootouts, it's practical for the most part, but that yet within this sort of basic paradigm that's replicated, like with Die Hard on a Blank, there's a tremendous amount of variation. You know, To Live and Die in LA is such a unique and distinct style of movie. And all of these things are in a conversation with each other, right? Because that's a Friedkin movie. French Connection has its footprints in this movie.
Huge influence on
like
this.
The Nolte character is very Popeye Doyle-esque in some ways, right? So all these things are in conversation with each other. But that's just a bit of table setting to explain to you what the kind of things, the kind of movies we're going to be talking about, and the kind of journey that we're looking to go on. So join us for this, will be a fun, fast-paced, foul-mouthed journey.
That's right. We're going to swear on this
spirit
series
of this movie with your two comically mismatched podcast hosts.
I'm too young for this shit.
So tell me, you just touched on this.
Nothing for that. Fine.
You just touched on this about your personal history with it. So you said, had you seen it at all, did you say?
Well, let me stop for a second, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
This is my favorite genre of movie of all time, if you can call it that. And I was thinking about this a lot, because I love Die Hard, and I watched Die Hard a million times, and we'll get there. But I grew up obsessively watching a lot of these movies, right? Most keenly the Lethal Weapon movies, so we'll save that conversation for later. This movie and movies like this personify the VHS era for me, like going to the video store and reading all the boxes. Do you remember how the boxes used to have, you remember how the description of the movie used to be like paragraphs and paragraphs long? Yeah. And I just remember picking them up and staring at them and reading them, and my dad being like, just pick one, because he wanted to leave the video store. Right.
It's the foreplay of it. Right?
Before the sex.
It is. But it's the anticipation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally lost to the current generation, but for me, like, that was all part of it, spending that 20, 30 minutes and looking at the boxes and seeing a few selected images and dreaming of
wondering what it is.
What adventure you might go on was all part of the
I bring
experience.
My daughter to the video store here because I want her to have the tactile experience of like going in and kind of look. Now it's tricky now because all kids know what everything is all the time now. So there's not as much like, you're so up on everything, or other kids are. There isn't that experience. So, but Yeah, these movies really speak to me about like my childhood and like growing up and falling in love with movies. Like these and Tarantino and of course Die Hard genre, but like action cinema that I probably shouldn't have been watching as like an 8-year-old is where it all starts.
This is a rough movie.
It really is.
And not just the racist language, but which is a whole conversation in and of itself, but it's violent and brutal.
Yeah.
Kind of from the opening, actually. But yeah, go ahead.
So
Yeah.
Weirdly, despite growing up with like Lethal Weapon 1, 2, 3 on the television all the time, this was a little bit of a blind spot. And I don't know why. I'm sure my father saw this movie. We never really talked about it. Maybe he had concerns about the racial stuff, about it or whatever. But I probably saw it once or twice on television growing up. Obviously rewatched it for this. Rewatched it twice. Second watch reviewing last night. I was like, Jesus, this movie is incredible. Now, it's not like I didn't feel that way the first time, but in the rewatch, I was like, holy shit. Like, this is a special, special movie.
It's interesting because I think once you go, one of the reasons I've returned to it so many times is once you go, this is something I love about movies in general, right? Because there's sort of multiple levels of experience. Often there's movies that, I think of an example of something that we talked about, Boiling Point, the Wesley Snipes movie. I know it's a random, but hear me out for a second. It's like the movie doesn't work. The story doesn't work.
Plus, it barely has any action in it.
It has no action in it.
There's 2 action scenes. Yeah.
But as you said, like the vibes are great and the cast is great. So one of the things I love about movies is there's like multiple levels of experience. And this is the first level is, does it work as a story? And if that's ideally, of course, that's the most important level. Right. But if you're a real cinephile lunatic like us, you can love a movie even if it fails as a story because you can love other elements, the music, the cinematography, the vibes, the style, a particular scene or sequence, even if it's in the narrative is broken.
Yeah,
this movie is great because you have the story is fantastic, but those tertiary or additional layers of experience, music, cinematography, supporting cast,
thematic ideas, that play in this
class
movie.
or ethnic collisions,
right?
What it's saying about the police,
right?
The fact that the African American captain uses a racial slur on a convict.
Right.
Like you could write an entire essay about the complexity of that and what that's saying about the institution of the police and how it makes even African Americans racist against their own people.
It's
because
fascinating.
There's a fascinating that moment is fascinating.
Yeah.
And this film is sort of fearless in its attacking of those like things that are taboo in society to talk about, right? So that's this film is such a rich.
Well, and that's why this genre means a lot to me personally.
Yeah,
because I can sort of trace like watching these movies back to like being like, going earlier, watching Chinatown, writing about Chinatown in high school, and I wrote an essay in high school about Chinatown and Oedipus Rex and the like incest at the center.
Oh,
of
sure,
them. So whether that held water as a 10th grader doesn't really matter, but like my brain is starting to burgeon. It's burgeoning this thinking. And like what I love about these movies, at least for me, maybe this is true for younger people in Marvel movies, right? Is that there's an entryway into cinema, into bigger ideas. Because like you can watch this movie and be like, this is a cool action movie with some funny lines. You can also watch this movie and be like, wow, Eddie Murphy in 1982 is both hilarious and also like represents this really fascinating character. There's just multiple layers upon which these movies work.
Kind of defines the studio style for the next decade.
Yes,
and beyond with Walter Hill's like aesthetic, because as you're saying, it was moving away post Heaven's Gate. And post the era of the auteur, which is now dying or dead, and is now moving back to, okay, the studios are going to drive the product. I hate to use that term, but they're going to drive the artistic output.
You can only do Heaven's Gate so many times, right? Before someone's like...
But it's not... it's moving away from issue-driven epics or whatever, or to, a more popular style of a more accessible popular style of like short, fast-paced, couple of movie stars and a movie kind of towards the high concept era, right? Like, which is probably started with maybe Top Gun, which is also a Paramount movie,
and yet these movies have ideas. They're not devoid of them. And what's so fascinating is
that's why it bridges the two eras.
And it's like it's sort of like mid-brow, and I like that about it, right? Like I like that you don't necessarily feel like you're not watching Reds, which is a movie I love. That was the movie
I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Funny that you said that.
Yeah. Which is a movie I love. I love it. Yeah, I love it.
That's still of the auteur era, right? And very inaccessible movie. For a mainstream audience.
If you're a big dork that really who's really into that era, it's absolutely fascinating. But there's a little bit of there's a I would say largely a really good balance here between directors who want to say something, or it's inherent to who they are, right? Like Walter Hill is always going to say something with one of his movies,
even though he tries not to.
But he does. He's too good.
Yeah, he's too talented.
And
he's also very unpretentious.
Right. You also have Michael Mann is coming of age in this era, right? Yep. There's a lot of guys who first thing they seem to want to do is entertain you, but they know that at their core, entertainment is also intellectually stimulating. Right? You can't just watch these movies and go this is I told you the Blood Money story about Snake Eyes with my dad, right? Like, this is the thing I think about all the time. How, you could watch a movie in 1997 like Snake Eyes, which is a really entertaining, weird movie. But my dad was like, this movie is about compromise, right? About compromising and this guy recovering from it. Like, these ideas are there, but they're not the driving factor of the thing.
They're sort of flavors and spices mixed into the stew.
And they come together in conflict. One of the reasons I love these movies, and I rank this sort of buddy movie genre as high as is it's always two characters learning how to deal with each other. I've always loved Lethal Weapon the most because it's about character first and action second. Even though the action in these movies rocks, it's all about the interplay. It's all about Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy giving each other shit for large sections of the movie and coming to get to know each other through action.
Well, let's stick a pin in that for a second and come back to it when we get to the heroes. There's a little bit of just business I want to get through, because just briefly want to touch on my personal history with this.
Yes, please.
Because when I grew up, again, let me take you on a journey back to...
You want me to say a little music? I do
Wayne's World style, right? So I remember my parents had a small portable a black and white television that had a dial on it to turn the channel, as I recall, right? And at some point, because I was so into movies, or maybe they wanted to get me out from under their feet, whatever. I was allowed to have the TV in my room when I was growing up at a certain point. And I remember watching so many movies sort of late at night that had that slight... See, this one is one, and Red Heat was another one, which also Walter Hill buddy movie that we'll be doing. It that had that slightly I probably shouldn't be watching this. And some of those movies, I remember watching Big Trouble in Little China and having to which we're also going to do, and having to turn it off because I was like, this is too intense and weird and scary.
Yeah.
I love that. Too young for it, right? But it was this window into a sort of slightly illicit, forbidden world, especially with these movies that would be on late at night and you're like, I shouldn't be watching this. I better keep the volume down. This was one of those movies that I remember watching in that context and loving. And I used to keep this little notebook because I loved the Leonard Maltin movie guides, right? I still have them. They were kind of how I absorbed all of this information about movie dates and directors and everything. So, and I was making my own little Leonard Maltin thing where I'd give it a rating and I'd write a line. I wish I still had it.
Did you invent Letterboxd?
yeah, I want some money from that. But it was, that's how into it. I just wanted to gorge on as many movies as possible. So I remember seeing this movie in that context and loving it, but probably too young to understand anything beyond Eddie Murphy is hilarious in this movie. And it was a cool thriller, right? And I do remember the James Remar character as being very frightening. I do remember the scene on the bus where he's like talking to David Patrick Kelly and he
Yeah.
asks how his girlfriend is, who he's taken hostage, and him being like, "What? I told you I was going to look after her."
Yeah.
And then just I remember that scene because it was sort of shocking
Yeah.
and unexpected, you know.
This
but-
movie doesn't pull punches, really.
No, and,
yeah.
and it's one of the reasons why it's so great. But in any case, it's been a movie then that I guess I returned to because I remember I had it on UK DVD, and I've written things that have been in this spirit because I
Right.
love the first movie that I wrote that kind of got me kickstarted my screenwriting career out here was sort of like 48 hours in a extreme sci-fi context. So
Okay.
as a little, Alien Nation is a movie I often come back to as a captivating concept, right?
Right.
So it's embedded pretty deep in me.
Sure.
This movie. Should we do just a bit of fast facts?
Let's do some fast facts.
just to sort of
very quickly.
explain-
Can I just tell you?
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I took the little portable TV upstairs and put it in my room. And my mom was like, "Yeah, but you can't watch TV at night. And if you do, I'm going to hear it because my bedroom is next to my parents." For Christmas that year, my dad got me wireless headphones.
Oh,
he just
there
knew.
you go,
He
yeah.
knew.
You can't it's a pull you can't
Right,
resist.
right, yeah, totally.
And
It's
the more forbidden it becomes, the more alluring.
Also, don't put a TV in your high school, your movie obsessed high school. And also they were like, "But we're not going to connect it to the cable," which of course they didn't. But I was like, there's 45 VHS tapes in my room. So it was like Speed was on replay,
Yeah.
Blade Runner was on replay. Like I would just put them in at night. And if they came into the room, I'd like, you couldn't hear it. So I'd be
Yeah.
watching movies late at night.
It's all part of it, yeah. So this movie came out in let me get the exact date here. December 8th of 1982. Is it a Christmas movie? Is 48 Hours a Christmas movie?
You know what it
It's
is?
kind of interesting, right? It's a holiday
It is,
release.
but it is a release. It's also 12 days before I was born.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is the earliest movie we've ever done because it was it came out before I was born.
All right. Well, distributed by Paramount Pictures, directed by Walter Hill. Some very interesting screenwriters on this project who are going to come up. They're going to come up a lot. Roger Spottiswoode will come up a lot. We already were talking about Air America, which he directed, which is sort of
I didn't realize he directed it until you said that.
Lethal Weapon adjacent, and a great movie that I really want to do, which is called Shoot to Kill, starring Sidney Poitier.
I like-
that's the US title. In the UK, it was called Deadly Pursuit.
On
It's
iconic cover to that movie. I have a
great,
very clear
great
memory.
body
yeah.
movie. It's Poitier and Tom Berenger, who we love.
Yeah, this is a Behringer podcast.
Indeed. Written by Roger Spottiswoode, Walter Hill, Larry Gross, and Stephen E. D'Souza, whose
Yes.
name you may recall. Produced by Lawrence Gordon and Joel Silver. We're going to talk about them in a second. And of course, it stars Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, as well as Annette O'Toole, James Remar, David Patrick Kelly, Sonny Landham, and sundry others. Shot by the great Rick Waite.
Oh, amazing.
Music by James Horner.
The score is unbelievable
Oh my
in
gosh.
this movie. It's unbelievable.
I don't know if we should go there now,
Okay.
or should we go there now?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Why not? This is our show.
The score for this movie.
All right, well, I got to watch the levels.
So this, just touching on that for a second, when this movie begins,
Yeah.
and every time I watch this, I have the same experience. The old Paramount logo comes up,
Philly special.
and you hear that James Horner just work of art that's multiple layers of like the steel drum, the sort of bass in there, there's a bit of synth, there's like a lot of stuff going on, and the and I'm just like, I am transported to movie heaven.
Oh, it's amazing.
Before there's even a single frame, just that, the first 5-10 seconds, I'm just like, I am transported. And it always throws me off that the next shot is not in an urban environment.
This is my theory.
It's a Western, right?
So this movie traces the history of action movies up until this moment, because when this movie started, I hadn't seen. So rewatching this, I was like, I don't remember the beginning of, how does 48 Hours begin? And so I'm sitting there and I wrote this note down, which is, this movie begins as a Western.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a chain gang movie.
Yeah.
Which is such like a Hollywood, Clark Gable did a chain gang movie. And like, you're kind of like, what movie am I watching here? And the score is so like powerful. and you kind of are disoriented. And like, again, what we were saying earlier, Walter Hill, very unpretentious, but like keeps doing things in his movies that are like really creative and interesting. And he makes The Warriors, which is essentially what? The Iliad, right? Like he's like kind of aware of history and mythology and all these things. And the fact that this movie starts as a Western, you're kind of, you're in
horses in a field.
You don't feel like I in my head. I'm like, why aren't we in San Francisco?
Absolutely,
right now?
yeah.
And then it's a chain gang movie, and then the Indian pulls up, and immediately the racist shit starts.
The first line in the movie is a racial, insensitive remark by the sort of piggish prison guard who says something about wonder what reservation he came off.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's the tone is set of like, this is a racially confrontational movie,
right?
But you're also playing with cowboys, Native American, that dusty desert landscape. Famously, I mean, we have to say this, David Giler, who's Walter Hill's longtime producing partner and co-writing partner, said that every movie Walter Hill made is a Western.
Yeah, totally.
Right? So everything's seen through that lens.
And you can feel him kind of like crashing into the early 80s once this hits the urban setting.
And he made, and he worked with Peckinpah, right? Walter Hill's, the work he did before is fascinating. Worked with Charles Bronson, and he wrote The Getaway for Peckinpah, right?
Which is a great movie.
And which of course was remade in the 90s. But those are a basic fast facts. Just the last one is that the budget was only, to my surprise, just $12 million. Admittedly, that's 1982.
Yeah.
But it grossed $78.9 million.
So it's a massive hit.
That's like, what, 7 times its budget, right? I'm not a math magician, but thereabouts, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about mathematician instead of mathematician.
I said that on purpose. That was an obscure Simpsons reference.
Oh, which
I'm not. When they bring a magician to like the nerdy kids' part, Martin Prince's party, and they're like, he's not. I'm not. I'm a mathematician.
That's so good.
So those are the. That's just a little bit of context, but. What I also wanted to talk about, on Die Hard on a Blank, as our longtime listeners will recall, we do a section called
Die Hard DNA. I almost took a drink from my
water
bottle.
Throw you.
No,
I was worried that was going to come out your nose there.
I like to be hydrated when I podcast.
This film also has some Die Hard DNA, which we may as well just touch on that real quick now, and then we'll talk about what our version of it is going to be for this show. This film does have significant Die Hard DNA via the presence of the producers, Larry Gordon and Joel Silver, who is hugely responsible for the aesthetic and vibe of most of these pictures.
They're almost the auteurs of these movies, if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, you see the same cast members, you see the same kind of the vibe and style and a sort of tone as well. That's often this like rough but funny tone, Co-screenwriter Stephen E. D'Souza, of course, was the co-screenwriter of Die Hard.
Who retweeted the fact that we're doing a 48 hours of buddy movies.
No way!
Yes,
we gotta engage with him. Because he's great. I mean, he's across so many of these movies. Of course, Ricochet was another one that he was the screenwriter on, and Commando, which this shares some lineage.
Maybe
with as
he's
well.
listening to this right now. If you are, thank you. We love you.
Great writer, great raconteur as well.
Yeah.
Also, this is worth noting. Did you spot actor Matt Landers, aka Send in the car. No,
but I have one of these for you.
Okay.
Matt, when is he in this movie?
So that guy who plays Captain Mitchell, the SWAT captain in Die Hard, plays Bob, who helps Jack Cates forge the papers to get Reggie out.
Totally.
He looks different because he's not wearing a hat. He's not wearing like that black baseball cap that you associate with. So he looks kind of
So I recognize that guy, but I didn't make that connection. There is another actor who is in this movie for about 3 to 4 seconds with Nick Nolte.
I wonder. Yeah. Go on.
I don't remember his name, but he is the actor from Lethal Weapon.
I researched
has the men in the 80s are tough. They're sensitive. The kind of like opening salvo thesis of Lethal Weapon. He's in both movies, basically playing
Jack Thibault.
Jack Thibault. That's right.
Yeah,
Great actor.
I think his character called like McCaskey or something in Lethal Weapon, and he plays the sort of depressed
Yeah.
detective.
Yeah.
It was like
I was crying in bed last night.
Great character and very interesting when we get to it. But yeah, he appears in that in one scene in this movie. So yeah, these films are all interconnected in the same way. And building on that, our version of Die Hard DNA, working title, is going to be 48 chromosomes.
I got to work on a. There's no correlation. There's no DNA.
We'll workshop it.
48 chromosomes. No,
it's a pilot.
That's not it.
So, i.e., what are the iconic elements of this film that would go on to be replicated in subsequent buddy movies? We're going to look out for things like this. Obviously, the top line one would be mismatched partners forced to work together for a common goal.
Yes.
Right. That's a pretty simple distillation of what most of these movies are exploring on a fundamental level, and then they branch out beyond that. Typically, they hate each other at first, but eventually reach a place of mutual understanding. Although some of the films will subvert that, right? Like, I want to do things like Training Day, which is sort of like a dark inversion of a buddy movie to some extent, right?
Yeah. With Tom Berenger.
With Berenger, let's get the air horn.
Why is Sniper on this list?
Don't worry about it.
Shut up.
Him and Billy Zane, they're buddies. That kind of is. You've sold me. Done.
God damn it. Let's watch Sniper again.
Oh, it's so good.
It's good.
So morally repugnant, but I love it. And JT Walsh appears briefly.
Wow,
in
that's
that
a
movie
Philly
as well.
special.
Great movie. I love Sniper. Angry police captain, right? Like such a
complaining about property damage. Yeah,
such a trope, to the point that actor obviously spoofed it in two spoofs from 1993.
Loaded Weapon and Last Action Hero. Loaded Weapon.
Yep. Then car chases and shootouts. Prolonged comic interludes, often in bars.
Yes.
Obviously this has the classic, like, Eddie goes into the redneck bar scene, which we'll talk about.
This is one of the great scenes of
one of the all-time
Yeah.
But it's like, that's a long set piece.
Yeah.
Right? So these films allow space for those kind of
like
extended moments.
The suicide jumper in Lethal Weapon.
Absolutely. Lethal Weapon has a few of them where they give like
do you really want to jump? I'm going to do it every time.
The Christmas tree scene is a little bit like that in Lethal Weapon. Or I think of the long bar scene in Midnight Run, where Charles Grodin has to go and grift money from those guys, and he pretends to be an FBI agent.
This is another thing.
Almost identical, because he's impersonating a law enforcement agent.
I don't want to divert things too much, but one thing I love about these movies is that the set pieces aren't just action scenes. They're like character driven.
Yes.
They're long dialogue scenes. Like, these movies really, in a way that some of the diehards, not all, some of the Die Hard blanks, like, don't really do. They just dig into character as the central conflict of the whole thing, right? So that scene, for example, in the bar when Murphy pretends to be a cop is the scene when Nick Nolte starts to respect him a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's like they do something for the story in addition to just being fun to watch.
Yes, they illuminate character in some way. Here's one of the ones, this is purely an aesthetic thing. It's like a vibe thing, but it's one that I love, that I've noticed. Walk and talks through police parking structures. You'll see that in Lethal Weapon, of course. You see it in Last Boy Scout. Mm-hmm. It's a Joel Silver special.
You need it too, because it's the thing that it sort of pinpoints the conflict of the characters, right? It pinpoints it kind of tells you what the problem's going to be between these two guys, right?
It gives them a little bit of space, and it's a cool backdrop for
the Chinatown shot that they're walking down the street with all the street signs in this movie.
Gosh.
They do it twice. You know why? It's so good. That's why.
Do it again.
Yeah, do it. I would watch a whole movie of those.
Back.
Yeah, exactly.
Fist fights and/or screaming matches between the two heroes, right? You can see that a lot.
They beat the shit out of each other in this movie.
Yeah. This takes it to pretty incredible extremes. Constant profanity and gratuitous nudity. We're definitely going to see that. Coincidentally, all these movies were produced by Joel Silver. I'm not drawing a connection between those two things. The James Horner score, Stephen E. D'Souza as writer, we'll see that a lot. But those are the kind of tenets, if you will.
Ooh, we live in a Twilight world.
We need to work on our balance. We have to figure that out.
By the way, Tenet, buddy movie.
Absolutely.
One of Nolan's best buddy movies. Yes.
Inverted buddy movie. Mm-hmm. Are there any other elements that you spotted that you thought, look, okay, that sort of establishes that stamps something that we're going to see a lot throughout the rest of this.
So I think one thing
exploration of this subgenre.
I think one thing that you often get in these movies doesn't quite fully come through in this one is that often the big bad's sidekick is the muscle or the heavy.
Good point.
So like Billy Bear in this movie is kind of like the muscle for James Remar's character. You know, we're going to see this a lot in the Lethal Weapon movies, but like there's usually two villains, right? Die Hard has this too with Carl and Gruber, right? But there's something specific that often there's like a mini buddy movie within these movies.
Well, this reminds me of what Isaac Butler was saying about doubling.
Yes.
In our Face-Off episode.
Yes, that's
right.
good.
Like this movie's perfect for that because you've got two good guys and two bad guys.
Yes.
I mean, they're all to some extent shades of grey,
right?
You know, but
in terms of good guys and bad,
but broadly, you know,
one of the more fascinating elements of the movie.
Yeah,
totally.
for sure. So that's a great shout.
That would be my big one. Yeah,
that's a great point. Let's dig into the meat of this.
Let's do it.
On as we do our version of, you know, with Die Hard on a Blank, we do anatomy of an action movie and we break it down into different subsections. You might want to call them tenets. You might not. We haven't figured that out yet.
Twilight World,
we may not. We just don't know.
There are friends at dusk on this series.
There are friends at dusk. We do know that. We can confirm it. We had it tested and we can confirm.
They didn't like each other at first, but now they're cool. They figured out mutual respect. Exactly.
So now I'm going to try doing my premises off the cuff. Ooh. Usually I sort of write these to distill it.
Now, important question. Do you want me to chime in at all? Or do you want me to let you get through it?
I think you can chime in.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, let me try and blunder my way through.
Because I know about my reputation for interrupting on the very show.
It's part of our buddy dynamic, right?
Like
I'm the tight ass and you're, you know.
Feels like
I'm very uptight.
Yeah, I'm a real sparkling gem.
You know,
I'm just anxious all the time and can't shut up.
Well,
I'm a live wire.
Yeah, somehow it works.
I'm a bird on a wire, not a buddy movie, but a movie I like.
1990 John Badham.
The John Badham
podcast. Okay, so the premise of this movie. Let me try and explain. So basically, two convicts played by James Remar and Sonny Landham, who are called Albert Gans.
Love that name.
Great name. And Billy Bear escape from a prison chain gang and start wreaking havoc in San Francisco. San Francisco police inspector Jack Cates, played by Nick Nolte, sort of stumbles into their mayhem by accident, ends up getting involved in a shootout during which he loses his gun, and there's two other colleagues that die in that shootout. As through the investigation, he realizes that it's Albert Gans and Billy Bear, and he goes to in order to try and track them down, seeks out a former member of their gang, Reggie Hammond, played by Eddie Murphy.
Oh, great.
Gets him a 48-hour furlough to try and bring them to justice. Right?
That was really, really, really good. I think that does the job.
That's basically the setup.
And I will add, and through this process, as in all buddy movies, Cates and Hammond come to a mutual understanding, especially once Hammond is honest with Cates about what's really going on and the fact that Gans is trying to get his hands on $500,000 from a score they did a few years before, and it's located in Hammond's car.
Yep. So some important other additional plot elements. But what do you think? What do you think this movie's about? What are your general thoughts on the movie? You know, this is usually where we talk about obviously the plot, the story, but thematically, how does it work? I mean, great premise. And it's interesting, the evolution of this premise, right? Because if you've read up on the movie, it started out, I think it was Larry Gordon, the producer, came up with this concept in the early 70s. In that iteration, it was like a mad criminal takes the Louisiana governor's daughter hostage and
Nick of Time vibes,
straps a bomb to her, and it's really nasty. And says, unless such and such happens in this deadline, he's going to blow her up. So the meanest cop tracks down the nastiest criminal who's in prison and gets him out to because of his knowledge of the kidnapper before this deadline. So it had all these different iterations, and there were other people that were attached or explored. Clint Eastwood at one point, Richard Pryor, who we mentioned. Clint Eastwood, they were actually looking at for the criminal.
Interesting.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
So
do you know at what point in this process it became like we're going to use a white cop and a black convict?
I think that was, I don't know. I couldn't pin that.
That's fine.
I couldn't pin down the specifics, but I know when Richard Pryor started to become a bankable box office star,
right?
Then there was a sort of shift towards, okay, because actually they wanted Gregory Hines for this, who was also sort of and we'll talk about him and
I
running.
love Gregory Hines.
Great. Oh, what a
I
prince!
love Gregory
Running
Hines,
Scared. We're going to do, of course. Don't worry, Himes Hive, rise up. We're here for you.
We're gonna
we got you covered.
Rise up, it's fun.
But yeah, this is the ultimate version of the story that it ended up as. But very simply, it's like two guys who completely hate each other have to work together for they both have a different agenda, right? Eddie Murphy just wants the money back and doesn't he needs Gans taken out of the picture because he doesn't want his money being
right. It's kind of his way out.
He's sitting on that money for when he gets out of prison because he's got a relatively short sentence, like 3 years.
Yeah, and he's 6 months left.
So he's almost done. He's pretty close to getting that.
Do we
money.
know why he went to prison? Did he get caught in a heist or something?
That's a good point because it can't be about this, right? Like it's some. There is a point where Nolte reads it off because when he comes in, he kind of because he's like, "Well, you write my life story, and all of that." But I can't remember the specifics.
They're
of what
so
what he
angry
went
at each
down
other.
for, but it wasn't the big score,
right?
But whereas Cates is looking. A, for justice, but B, for revenge on the two cops that killed him and kind of humiliated him by taking his gun.
Right.
And
also they kill his...
By the way, on that, a great way to look at the theme of this movie, masculinity, right?
Yeah.
The gun, the phallic symbol, has been taken from him.
Yes.
Thus robbing him of his perceived virility, masculinity. He feels somehow... incomplete as the type of man that he is, that, as you say, that John Wayne I think is a great comp.
It's in that lineage.
Also a racist. Right.
Nah, he was fine.
So it tracks, right? So but he is of that like swaggering American cowboy type, like gruff character that has is sort of weirdly irascibly lovable.
I can't remember what movie it is, but there is a movie where a cop loses his... Oh my god, yeah, there's a great Japanese buddy movie from 1941 called Stray Dog.
Yes,
which is young Toshiro Mifune and a great Japanese actor named Takashi Shimura, and that movie is about a rookie cop losing his gun and falling. So like. And those are all filmed.
Blue Steel is another one that's about that explicitly explores the psychosexual links between a firearm and I mean it's Jamie Lee Curtis's character who has her gun stolen by...
Is that a Catherine Bigelow movie?
It is. And Bigelow,
Ron Silver,
Catherine Bigelow and David Giler, Walter's partner, were once romantically involved. They once dated. So all these
she really went for some tough guys.
This crowd all kind of came up together. They're all kind of doing like cool stuff together, right? But what is this film beyond the superficial? Right, we know it's a buddy movie. We know it's a cop and a con, but it cuts a lot deeper than that, right? What's this film about beyond the obvious incidences of the plot?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things in this that are hard to speak about as a white guy, but I'll do the best I can here to talk about it. So there's a line early in the movie in that amazing oneer.
Yes.
Oh, in the police department.
Altman-esque, right?
Incredible. I watched it 3 times.
It's an incredible tracking shot in the police station.
Yeah, and it just it's
like 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I like about 3 minutes in, I was like, this is one take. Which I'm not always cognizantly aware of. I don't always do that.
It's so subtle.
Yeah,
it's really not flashy.
So there's a moment in that scene, I'm putting this together on the fly because I kind of, in recurring last night, watching it again last night, it came to me, where this woman says something like, he's looking at, I think, mugshots? And she goes like, man, there are some evil people in this world. And Nolte
Right.
says, if there weren't, what would we be doing with our time, right? And so I think that that's a good key into what this movie is about, which is kind of like the idea of what the police are and what they actually do day to day, right? And obviously this is like the whole issue of the police is complicated to talk about, but I think that that's a key into the kind of different identities that these guys have throughout the movie. More so with Murphy than with Nolte, but one thing early on in the movie, he's such okay. So I'll just say this: Cates is an asshole.
Oh, he's the
Like,
worst.
he's like a
He's awful.
You love him because that's what these movies do to you.
Yeah.
But he's racist. He's sexist.
Yep.
He's physically and verbally abusive
He's
to
a jerk
convict.
to
He's
everyone.
a jerk. He's awful. He represents this kind of like beaten down dude who thinks like at one point after they beat the shit out of each other, when they go to the gas station and they're like cleaning themselves up and maybe they're
Right.
fixing the car up. He's like, what do I owe you? Nolte's amazing. And the guy's like $10. And he gives him this look like he's just said, like, you owe me your firstborn son.
Right,
It's like,
right.
guy,
Yeah.
just remove
Take
the
the
stick
win.
from your ass,
Yeah,
right?
like-
And like,
right.
it's a testament to Nolte that you still
It is
care about the
almost
character.
inexplicable
Yes.
that you love this character.
Right.
Right. It's kind of the movie performs a weird trick on you because he is utterly reprehensible.
Yeah,
His
unbelievable.
on-screen actions are without fail appalling.
Yeah.
From the word go.
Yeah. Even like the scene when he I love this movie. The scene when Eddie Murphy is asleep in the backseat of the car and he comes with the
yeah,
coffees,
like-
which is a great gesture.
Yeah.
But then he slams the door
I know,
to
like,
wake him
why?
up. It's just
Asshole.
like, yeah, like this guy's in jail. Like
Like,
he's out
give him
for
a
40.
break.
Yeah, like, and you know, I guess you could argue over the course of the movie, he gets a little better. He becomes more.
And
He
there
kind
are
of
a couple of
redeems himself.
moments that are, on that. Yeah.
But he has this line early on in the movie, or not early on in the movie, but early on with they're leaving. He's taking Hammond out of the station, and he's like, "My job is to keep you down."
Yeah.
And you're like,
So dark. Like such a
"Well, it's an open admittal of kind of like what he's going to do to this. You're less than what."
they constantly call him convict.
Well, that's what I was about to say.
Right?
Beyond the use of a racial slur in this movie, he's referred to as a convict all the time,
it's
and
so
it's awful. But then
brutal.
later in the movie, Nolte apologizes to him and goes, "I was
Yeah.
just doing my job, keeping you down." And if that's not a little bit of a condemnation of the law enforcement within the movie, that's a commentary, right? Like the whole job of this guy is to keep people down, right? Which is interesting.
Absolutely.
The second thing that I think is really interesting is the way Eddie Murphy plays different roles in this movie. To Jack, he's a convict. Eventually, he becomes a person. But there's that amazing scene when he walks in and he's like, "I'm a cop!" And he starts like taking charge of the situation and beating the shit out of all these people. And then later, he's really suave with the ladies. He like
Right.
his
He impersonates a lawyer at one
Right,
point
right,
to try
right.
and get a bit of action with a couple
Right.
of girls in the police station.
And there's like, you could read a modern analysis of this as being like code switching. He's doing
Yes.
different identities. And I think that's one of the things that the movie is about, is that at the beginning of this movie, it's like Murphy is a convict and that's all he can be. But over the course of the movie, we as the audience start to see him as this much more like smart, interesting. The first indication is like, he puts on this beautiful suit, right? And he's like, no, I'm like a well-dressed guy. And like, Murphy is later going to make kind of confrontational comedy specials where like a big part of it is like, I'm black, deal with it. And he's beloved by white people. But you can feel it starting here where he's kind of at the beginning of the movie, you're like, he's just this scum dude that like, but like that, like, and I would say 1982 audiences by and large may have a little bit been more comfortable with Nolte's whole thing, right? But now you watch it and like, Eddie Murphy's a survivor and his identity shifts and his persona shifts and he does all these.
He's adaptive.
He's adaptive.
Yeah.
Like the scene when he wants to have sex with a woman and he goes up to the guy that's chatting her up and he's like, "That's my wife." It's just so funny and charming. And so I think there's a little bit about identity where at the beginning of the movie, Nolte is hemmed into being a cop who has to keep people down and by the end is maybe changed a little bit. And Murphy begins the movie as a guy who we think can do nothing, and by the end of the movie is the most
It's such an interesting
sophisticated-
reading because it's sort of like they both transcend their societal roles,
Yes.
right? Like Nolte is the embodiment of a piggish, racist, bullying cop.
Right.
Okay, like and he's he explicitly says, like, I was just doing my job. I was keeping you down.
Yeah.
Which is such a disturbing idea, but honest,
and an indictment,
right? An indictment of the police as an institution and these kind of institutions in society that's sort of like, you're in this position, and it's implied that it's both racial prejudice and prejudice to the fact that he has a criminal background and has been convicted of a crime. Ergo, you are
less than human
in his parlance, lesser,
a convict,
and I need to keep my boot on your throat, and that's just how it is, right? But what he comes to realize that's so interesting is like, no, this is a dimensional human being who has incredible qualities.
He's chameleonic, he's smart,
brave,
he can fight.
He's courageous, and I think Nolte respects the fact that he doesn't give in to his bullying, and he gives it back as good as he gets it, kind of thing, right? But at the same time, he's clever, he's inventive, he's really courageous in the redneck bar scene. So I think that's such an interesting reading, and it's also sort of on a classical level. It's sort of like the idea, and Lethal Weapon does this too, and Shane Black has talked about it, where there's guys out there that are so bad that you have to get the worst of the worst on the other side, the gunslingers.
That's fascinating.
You know, that are really also awful.
Yeah.
To go and get the guys that are even worse.
That's like a famous Shane Black quote.
Yeah.
Our buddy Travis Woods has that in his Lethal Weapon review on Letterboxd. This kind of like, we needed the worst kind of hero.
Yeah.
Mel Gibson, Riggs in Lethal Weapon to kind of come in and do it. You know? So because the scene at the end where Nolte as Cates ultimately confronts Remar in Chinatown, Gans. You remember that there's such a Western moment.
Oh yeah, and there's a shot where Nolte steps out like from behind, and the look on his face. I watched it with my wife, and she when he steps out, she was like, she said a cuss word. She basically was like, fucking hell.
Yeah. Looks insane.
It's like, that is lethal.
Yeah.
That is a guy who is like, I am going to murder you. Mm-hmm. And somehow Nolte is so powerful that he can convey that because he's regained his potency, to use the sort of Freudian reading that we're kind of playing with,
interesting,
right? Like at that point, he's like, "Nah, let me show you who I really am," and it's dark.
Yeah.
He just goes and blows this guy away, and kind of puts Eddie at risk in that moment. But the way that it's played is just like, no, this is what he was built to do, which is it's like a Training Day touches on this as well a little bit. Like it takes a wolf to catch a wolf, and that's what Nolte's Jack Cates is.
And you could argue that it is a really reactionary opinion, which is like, we have to be as bad as the guys who are out there.
It is, but we're not making, these movies don't have to be like, there's how society is, and there's how one as a, progressive liberal utopianist might wish it is.
Wow,
but
San
Francisco in 1982 is not a utopia.
I think that's what I think is really great about these movies. Is that they can
it's real, it's honest.
And they can contain opposing ideas, which is like, Murphy is more than some of his parts, and also Nolte gets the job done, but is also a piece of shit, right? Yeah. And I like that the movie is honest about that. Yeah. Like, these guys are not good guys necessarily.
Neither of them are. Let's talk about that. Let's move into our hero section and talk about that in a little bit more detail, because I also love that the movie doesn't pull a punch on trying to make Reggie some kind of saint, where it was like, oh, I was trying to steal money to like give it back to the church or something. No, he was a criminal.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
He was. They were ripping off him, Luther, Gans and Billy Bear, and the other guy, I think they kill Wong, ripped off a drug dealer for $500,000. There was no altruism.
Yeah,
they're
it's
fucking
not like
criminals.
They're Robin Hood. It's not like it's Robin Hood,
right? I love that it doesn't like soft pedal it.
Yeah,
and it doesn't soft pedal that Jack Cates is a racist piece of shit.
Yeah, no, I agree.
They're both feel like realistic people in this world. The film isn't bending over backwards to like make you like them or soften them or justify their actions.
I know we're going to talk about it later, but it's hard not to talk about it. I was rewatching Lethal Weapon in this, and there's such a smart thing that movie does where it opens with Roger Murtaugh, the family man. He's like poking fun at his wife, and he's like, hey, like at the kids, and he like picks his daughter up and gives her a kiss. And then the next scene, he's at the site of the murder, and Dixie is there, the prostitute.
Oh, yeah.
And he's such an asshole.
Says something horrible to her, doesn't he?
He says something like, all dressed up and no one to blow.
Very
and you're
Shane
like,
Black.
Yeah. But it's like, again,
Yeah.
I've as a kid, I always like Murtaugh's the good guy. And then you rewatch that and you're like,
not nice.
Yeah, he's like that
Shouldn't
throughout the
say
movies.
that.
You
That's
shouldn't
not
say
nice.
that. Isn't nice. Like,
It should be nice.
Sex workers,
Yeah,
big thing that we're going to talk about on this show. But
yeah.
I do think that like, not, you said earlier they take some of the edges off. In the 80s, the edges come off a little bit, some of these characters.
Yeah.
But they're still pretty
that's why this feels like a 70s picture.
Totally.
Right? But it's just done, the characters are from the 70s almost.
Right.
But
well, they literally are. It's 1982.
Right. And they even reference that, Nolte is kind of an icon of the 70s, to some extent, and Murphy represents the new
Murphy's
era,
20 years
right?
old when he makes this movie.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's also funny that that's what a 20-year-old looked like in 1982. You're like, what? He looks older than me.
Really weird. But a couple of things I just wanted to mention, that little bits of subtlety that I just adore about this movie. To your point earlier where you said about the little things that Nolte does that start to subtly show that when he starts to like Reggie, one of the details is really subtle, but they're crossing the street. I think they see Luther or something and they have to like rush or whatever, or they've caught a break on the case, whatever. And they're rushing across the street, across traffic, and Nolte just goes watch out. Yeah. Like it's so brilliant.
Yeah, I didn't even
because
notice that.
It's like he actually really he does care about him. He just can't. He believes because of his conditioning and his racist, institutionalized belief system that he has to treat him in a certain way. But actually, as a human being, he does care about him and doesn't want him to get
to that point.
Brilliant.
When they're in the subway station, they're like very close to each other. Like there's an intimacy to the way they're walking next to each other and the way they touch each other. And like, I think that's going to come up throughout, is like, there's a racial dynamic to all these movies and like, and the kind of how the characters kind of feel about each other, but they do become closer. Like when they're sitting in the bar late before it brings them back to jail later in the movie, like it's intimate. They're intimate with one another. They're very close. Like he's kind of like Reggie Hammond calling him from the Vromans Club kind of like completely redeems it in Nick Nolte's eyes.
Here's an interesting question for you. Like, why? It's pretty obvious why Jack comes to like Reggie. For a multitude, he's so charismatic, he's funny, he's brave, he's courageous, he's, all of these incredible things. But why does Reggie like Jack by the end? Or does he?
Well,
what is Jack's qualities? Because he's so awful to him.
One of the things that I think is really...
Or does he?
I think maybe he sees him as a means to an end, and I've never seen another 48 Hours, so I'll be curious about that.
When we get to it, it's interesting.
Yeah, but because they only made one sequel, which is interesting, and I think it's because the second one didn't do as well as the first one. But there's a really powerful... That moment when they're in the bar, he goes like, I'm sorry about all the things I said to you. Like using the N-word and the watermelon.
Oh my gosh.
So awful.
Awful.
But Murphy, this is such a powerful moment. There's two really powerful moments. There's a bunch of powerful moments, but there's two that I think about a lot. One is when Cates points his gun at Murphy after he's knocked over Luther. And he's like, do not point your gun at me. And you're like, this is like
too real.
Tough to watch. It's very real. That one. But the second one is Nolte's apologizing. Sorry for calling it that. And he goes, it's just me doing my job, keeping you down. And Murphy says, yeah, but there are some other things in there too.
Yeah, it doesn't
Jack.
explain everything, basically.
And then he starts laughing.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful to me because it's like, yeah, you can like be a cop and you can escape this conditioning and you can like have a moment when you're like, oh, you're actually a person, but it doesn't go do away with like the larger societal issues, like the way all those rednecks look at him when he walks into the bar. Like this movie acknowledges that like racism exists. Many, many people are racist, whether they're saying this word or not. Like the cavalier way people throw around racial slurs in this movie, which is not
shocking.
Fly in a movie anymore.
Shocking.
Yeah. And it shouldn't probably, but this is a really interesting kind of, it's a movie about how a guy like that feels in a setting. And I think at the end he likes Jack, but maybe he's able to see his limitations a little bit more, right? Like he's not He's not like, well, you're actually not a racist. Like, it's not like at the end of the movie, Jack Cates is not a racist.
It's not Midnight Run, right? Where they end and they've like, oh, we could have been great friends in another life. I think it's sort of like, I can kind of tolerate you and I can see you have one or two useful qualities for this situation, but they're not going
to be best
And interesting,
friends.
Another 48 Hours it's not like, say, Beverly Hills Cop. In the Beverly Hills Cop 2, in the first sequel, Rosewood, Taggart, and Murphy, and even Bogomil are all homies.
Right.
They've gone through their shit. Now they're
it's
mates.
Like Murtaugh and Riggs, where in the second movie they're best friends.
Doesn't do Another 48 Hours doesn't do that.
Yeah,
because
I had a feeling it wouldn't.
They don't like each other.
Yeah.
To some extent, they're forced to work together, and they find a subtle bit of affinity. But I think it's more about Nolte realizing Reggie is like actually kind of a spectacular human being.
Yeah.
More so than Reggie being like, oh, Jack Cates, this horrible racist cop who's bullied me incessantly is actually all right.
He's okay.
I don't know, he's not all right.
Which is very...
He's a prick.
Not Hollywood.
Yeah. No, it's great. That's what I love about it. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about we just take a moment to talk about the iconic Redneck Bar scene.
Whew.
And a scene where a young 20-year-old sketch comedy actor becomes hold
a movie star?
of the movie industry for the next decade.
Yeah.
And grabs it by the throat and says, this is mine now, yes?
One of the most important figures, maybe the most important figures in this entire series, right? Like, it's Eddie Murphy, Mel Gibson. Like, he is the key figure in this kind of like action comedy era, right? You know, it's fascinating. Yeah, that scene's amazing.
Let's just explain what it is for anyone. Like, briefly, the situation requires that they need to go to this particular bar, which is called Torchy's, which is a Walter Hill signature. Torchy's is in multiple films, including The Driver and Streets of Fire.
Torchycast?
Torchycast? That's what we're doing.
Oh yeah, I guess.
We need T-shirts that say Torchy's. Let's make that happen. So it's
would
kind
you
of
guys buy one?
It's interesting just to touch on that for a second, because this is like pre the Tarantino like pack of red apples type stuff that interlinks the universe. Although they would, in some ways, they would have to be a reboot of each universe because the bar has different purposes.
Yeah,
right. But,
that's interesting
because the bar Torchy's in this thing is not like Torchy's in other films, but nonetheless, it takes place in this bar, which is just a nightmare of Confederate flags,
right?
And it looks like the worst place on earth. Like, I can't think of another bar I would rather go to less than this bar,
but
as opposed to Romans later, where I'd love to kick it.
Right. Oh, yeah,
there's an absolute blast at that place.
The funny thing is, Romans is, I think of as the bookstore in Pasadena. So I'm always like, yeah, go.
Oh, that place is so fun.
But Nolte has that line where he's like, "I love country boys," and you're like, "You racist."
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, he's horrible.
So Reggie has to go in there knowing this vibe of people playing the fiddle and and all these Confederate flags and a outwardly hostile, racially oppressive environment,
to say the least,
and get information. And he's also doing, because he's making a bet with him as well, isn't he? He says, if we get a lead out of this, turn your back for half an hour so I can go and get my end away, basically.
Yeah, get some trim. I love when he says trim.
A word I don't feel comfortable saying.
It's weird.
And he proceeds to, he Peter Jason is the bartender. John Carpenter, familiar to fans of his works. He's in almost all of his films, and is outwardly racist to him. And Reggie just completely takes command of the scene,
right? And he beats the shit out of two guys, and
and ultimately, I mean, he's attacked physically at one point by one of the guys who straight up says the N-word to his face.
It's tough.
It's really, really incredible. But Eddie and Reggie, who kind of amalgamate to some extent, the persona is so clear, just walks away and like, I am going to take all of that outdated, disgusting country racism and expose it for the idiocy that it is,
right?
And remind everybody this is like a new era. and as he literally said, there's a new sheriff in town.
A new sheriff in town.
It's very like meta because in hindsight, because it's like it's Eddie Murphy saying, as not Reggie but Eddie Murphy, there is a new sheriff in town. There is a new comedy star in town, and his name is Eddie Murphy.
Totally,
you know. So it's such an iconic.
It's the best scene in the movie. It's
the scene the movie's remembered for beyond like maybe hardcore sort of, you know, fans of the genre.
Good. Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But it's such an extraordinary moment. And it is, I was trying to think, I can't think of another example of a movie star that came as sort of fully formed as Eddie Murphy, where it was like, this is my persona in their screen debut.
That's really good.
In their screen debut. Right? In their feature film debut, Eddie Murphy is like, this is who I am. And his persona was established and crystallized immediately and continued for the rest of his career. He's done, you know, he's branched out with the odd thing, and he's done some serious dramatic work.
He's a good actor.
You know, I think he got an Oscar nomination for
Dreamgirls.
And,
yes.
you know, he can do dramatic stuff as well. But broadly, his persona was immediately established. And even if you think of, say, like Glenn Powell now, like a big breakthrough star, right? He didn't come out of nowhere. He's in Dark Knight Rises, but even in Top Gun Maverick, which is like his breakthrough role, he's probably like the sixth lead.
Yeah,
right.
I would say,
you know,
and he's in things like Everybody Wants Some and a bunch of Richard Linklater movies before that. So it's like, yeah, he doesn't come out like the second lead.
It's not
of
like
movie.
he's suddenly like you just came out of a cocoon, perfect, and nailed it.
Well, that's because it's one of a kind. There's only like one guy.
I cannot think of another example, because usually, even when you're an up and coming, you have to do one or two, you know, things first that are maybe when people see your potential. But Eddie Murphy was just like, boom,
totally.
I'm here. I know exactly who I am. I have a unique persona, and you're going to be seeing a lot of me for the next 30 years.
And I gotta say, he's so funny.
Oh,
like I'm not like a person that sits and laughs at movies when they're alone watching something on like an iPad at 9:30 at night. But like I was like, Roxanne, I was laughing out loud at this. What
an introduction.
And you know, you could argue that like then with that reading of, if this movie is metaphorically is the movie that meta-textually is the movie that announces Eddie Murphy, then Nolte is the like 70s audience, or like kind of being like, I don't like this guy. You know, it's like an interesting reading of the movie as being about Eddie Murphy.
It's generational as well. Yeah,
totally. Dominance on the industry.
Well, those are the heroes. Let's talk a little bit briefly about the villains. Albert Gans, played by the incredible James Remar, and Billy Bear, played by the equally formidable,
he's excellent,
Sonny Landham, who would of course go on to also play a character called Billy in Predator.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I hadn't even made that connection.
Kind of a wild guy in his personal life. No, he's not. I think he was in the adult film industry at one point. He went into politics. I think his views were very
okay.
It's a thing.
It's an interesting time for movie
putting
stars.
That aside,
yeah, of course.
And you know, staying on a pretty cool like villainous double act.
Yeah, totally. I totally think so. With Remar,
also with an ethnic you know, diversity element in there, right? Which is why it's kind of interesting. You know, it's like it makes
a doubling thing.
Yeah. You know, the outlaw and the Native American outlaw.
One thing that this movie doesn't do, and this is not a criticism, is it doesn't make either of these guys particularly dimensional. Like, they're just shitty. It's interesting. There's an early scene with Remar, with Gans's character, when he's like watching like a 1980s cartoon. Yeah. And he's like very
Space Kid.
And then like, I think it's kind of like, oh, is this a guy who feels like he's alien? Like, is there something to read here about this character? I was
fascinated by that moment. Yeah.
And like talk about unnecessary nudity, the prostitute in the bathroom telling her life story, and he's just like staring at the television. Maybe that's just there to establish his like, I don't give a shit, the psychopath, sociopathic kind of tendency.
It could also be he's been in prison for a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
So the probable reading might not be like, oh, this is hugely symbolic, but a little bit more of I've been in prison. This is what culture is now.
Well, Murphy has a line later when he's watching the workout video through the window of the girl's apartment. He's like, TV is different now.
It's weird because we don't. Sometimes that stuff culturally just it doesn't click for us because of the the timing. Flight of the Navigator is a film that does that really, really well.
Oh yeah, interesting. God, that movie. I used to watch that movie
where
all the
people
time.
are like, "Wow, MTV didn't exist when the kids in the era where he lived."
Right.
Things like that. So those sort of things are in there. But yeah, they're not particularly dimensional. The one thing we know about Albert Gans is, or from I think that sex worker, when she gives her report, says that he likes killing cops more than having sex, basically.
Right. It's a big thing in the 80s,
dark.
killing cops. That's a big conflict driver in these movies. And sometimes in these movies, like when we think Riggs is dead in Lethal Weapon,
and he kills several, especially during his escape. He kills like 2 or 3. He kills Jonathan Banks's character and the other cop. Let's talk about just that scene for a second.
Yeah.
First of all, how great it is that Jonathan Banks shows up.
Yeah, it's really cool to see him in this.
So young and brilliant.
But yet still looks exactly
he looks the
like
same,
Jonathan Banks.
and he's such a great face, and he's so good. But
Who's
it's also
his partner?
His name, the character's called Van Zandt. He calls him Van.
Yeah, so Van Zandt's a dick. He's a
real dick. He's horrible to the girl working on the desk.
Yeah, for no reason.
He also doesn't. His name is it's James Keane as Inspector.
I've seen him a bunch of
Van
other things,
Zandt, but very believable in the part.
Yeah, totally.
But such a great scene and a introduction to the brutality of. I guess we've already seen what he was like in The Escape, but now we see an almost excessive, sadistic cruelty, and a desire to really exact some kind of vengeance against cops specifically.
Right. Remar's so interesting because the first thing I think about when I see him is his scene in Oppenheimer.
Oh, is he in that? Gosh.
He plays the guy,
I can't remember.
the Secretary of Defense, who has one line where he's like, we crossed Kyoto off the list. My wife and I honeymoon there when they're trying to decide.
Yeah, okay.
And that moment is obviously chilling, but it's funny to think he's just been around for so long. He's such a pivotal.
I mean, he's a fascinating figure. And of course, a lot of people that are into this kind of stuff will know that he was actually cast and shot footage as Hicks in Aliens, but notoriously, which was of course produced by Walter Hill,
right?
But was battling a very severe drug problem, and so
they reshot
They got rid of him, and James Remar subsequently was not bitter, but was very contrite about it actually, because it affected his relationship with Walter Hill, who felt, I think, embarrassed because it was I recommended this guy, and and he's kind of let me. They worked it out and they worked together subsequently, but Remar could have had a different. That would potentially put you on path to more leading man type.
Yeah.
That was a heroic part.
Because that ended up being Michael Biehn, right?
It ended up being Michael Biehn, who was brought in at the last second.
So good.
And dropped in, and you'd never know it because he's incredible. And I think it all worked out.
I will not give that order. I know it's a different movie, but it's just where my brain went.
It's interesting that Remar was on track for a potentially different kind of career, but ended up having this incredible career as just a rock solid character actor. I love him in Dexter. He plays Dexter's dad.
Right. He's very soft in his later career.
He's just wonderful actor.
We've talked about this before, how the guys in this era are such guys.
Yeah.
For they're not movie stars. They're bartenders, or they've had jobs before. Yeah. They're just they feel like real people in the world.
Yeah.
And Remar is one of those. He's scary. That vest he wears
looks a bit hot.
Yeah, it's a little sweaty.
It's a little
clammy. The armpits aren't covered.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They're sort of a thick.
It's are you wearing a
tank top? It's make up your mind. Are you hot or cold?
Yeah. What are you doing, Remar? It's San Francisco.
We'll get into some of those things in a bit more detail
is weird.
About the fashion. Let's talk about the action briefly, the set pieces. Any favorite set piece moments?
You know what I actually would say instead of saying there's a set. I think all the set pieces are good.
Action,
the brevity.
Yeah.
They're brief.
It moves at such a clip,
which I like. I would say the bus chase is pretty iconic.
Yep.
But it's fast. It's 45 seconds of screen time, and I sometimes think that I wish that sometimes action scenes were shorter in general. I think there's a real power to that. Lethal Weapon similarly has these the drug bust in the Christmas tree lot, or these various things that are only a couple minutes long, but really pop. Yeah. They really work. I don't know when it is that action sequences started to get much, much longer, but they're all good. Probably have a preference for the bus one. Love the visual storytelling of the subway setup. How they're all just kind of looking at each other. And again, it's not about the action. It's about the rising action to when the action actually happens, and that cop.
Yeah, his style of action. We did a whole episode on Last Man Standing, Walter Hill's Prohibition era Western slash
Die Hard in the
slash philosophical music.
Yeah, his movies are definitely not about anything.
But, the action isn't necessarily, it's not The Matrix, right? But there's just a kind of minimal, there's a sort of minimalism, super stylish minimalism.
It's poetic.
Yeah.
His violence is poetic.
Another thing to look out for, something that I've noticed as a sort of Walter Hill super fan, is his fetish for buses that appears in this film. First of all, there's the prison bus. Then there is the bus chase, and the fact that Sonny Landham turns up driving the bus. So they have this unusual, implies something horrible that's probably happened off screen.
Like, did they just steal the bus or kick everyone off? Yeah.
Streets of Fire, the whole movie is like them going on a bus from point A to point B.
You're a big fan of that movie.
Huge,
I've never seen it. I should watch it.
Streets of Fire.
It's kind of having a moment, or it had a moment like a year ago. I don't think it's on Netflix.
It was his anniversary. And Red Heat features a scene with a bus chase through the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
So you also see it in Southern Comfort. He has a thing about buses. Something to keep an eye on. And finally, I guess the humor. Any favorite comedic
or do we have a best line award
moments?
Here?
We're not going to do a best line, but by all means, chuck it in now if you.
Well, I just love
not in the awards, but
I love the line I keep thinking about is when Nolte or I guess I should say when Cates and Hammond hit up the Billy Bear's girlfriend.
Oh yeah,
for the first time. And she's like, he owes me money. And she's like, whatever. And then Nolte has this line. He goes, sounds like a stormy romance.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like a real stormy romance.
I really like that. I just feel like that's
the
got
bit
that
at the beginning, you mentioned this, that I thought it was interesting. You said that it was sort of like Cassavetes light.
Yes.
His early scenes with Annette O'Toole, where she says something like, if you let me stay at your place, you could put on a clean shirt in the morning or whatever.
Yeah.
And he says, what makes you think I have any clean shirts at my place?
Man, those early scenes. It's just, it's like.
Why do you say that? What was the.
Well, it's just like.
The Cassavetes.
There's this codependency in that relationship where it's like, I hate you, but I love you, but I hate you, but I love you. It just feels like, I don't know, it feels like Walter Hill saw Faces and was like, I should put that in one of my movies. Because that's the thing that's so interesting about these movies coming out of the 60s and 70s is you can't help but be mega influenced by the early stuff, right? And one thing that I think we're seeing now, this is a theory that's popping up now in a lot of action movies, is they're being influenced by other older, I would say, better action movies, right? So when you see the scene in Captain America Civil War, when he gets on the elevator and he gets jumped by all the dudes, the first thing you think about is Die Hard with a Vengeance, right? But it's in Die Hard with a Vengeance or in these movies, they're all influenced by gritty 60s and 70s movies like The French Connection or Husbands,
Point Blank.
These movies. Of course, there were action movies before that. John Ford existed. There were action movies before these, war movies before these, right? Cassavetes arguably made 2 action movies that are influenced this genre. But my point is more these movies are doing the action, but what they're drawing from is the gritty interpersonal dynamics of 60s and 70s.
And one of
cinema.
the things that all the different 4 great writers worked on this movie, and I think they all added something slightly different. And one of them, I forget which one, I think it might have been Larry Gross, was tasked to breathe a little air into with the relational scenes with the female characters, and make them all, because women get a very rough ride in this movie. And to be fair, it's often the case in a lot of Walter Hill's films that the women are general. I mean, everyone's treated pretty rough. They're all put through the meat grind. And of course, Walter Hill was largely responsible for creating the character of Ripley, right? Making her a woman,
right?
Okay, so it's not. It's no knock on him or anything like that, but it is just a trope of a lot of these movies. And I think it's also partly because they are all Westerns, and in a lot of Westerns there are sex workers who are treated brutally by outlaws and sheriffs and whatever, and they're all sort of victims of circumstance to some extent. But there was an interesting point that was made just about this, that was while the women are given short shrift in this film for the most part, the film is all, on some level, all about the men that just are trying to figure it out with their with women, and how their imaginations are haunted by Nick Nolte and Annette O'Toole can't figure it out. They clearly have some kind of weirdly toxic push-pull thing going on. Don't know what she sees in him beyond the fact that Nick Nolte is a pretty good-looking,
pretty good-looking guy. Wears a suit like nobody's business.
For sure.
Yeah.
But beyond the, if you, as soon as he opens his mouth, it's pretty rough going.
What do you mean?
Pouring his whiskey into his morning coffee and treating her like shit for no apparent reason. But he is upset by the fact that he can't figure out that relationship.
He can't communicate. He's a victim of his own conditioning.
And similarly, like Billy Barron and his girlfriend and Reggie trying to find. I mean, he's less concerned about a relationship, and it's more superficial and transactional.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's like they're all in some ways haunted by that. It was just an interesting little. It's very, very small.
Yeah,
and I'm not sort of trying to mount a defect like this is by no means a feminist picture.
To say the least.
Let's move on to our final section of the show.
Ooh.
Which will be the Action Movie Awards, the 48-hour Oscars.
Let's put on our let's put on our very expensive suits that somehow look like they're still in really good shape. Let's put on our vests that we're wearing in San Francisco heat.
Yes. So as we're talking about fashion, the first award is going to be, so these are all new. So we're test driving these. So we kind of want your feedback. But this one I'm particularly
getting on the bus.
Excited about, which is the Nolte Scarf Award for Best Fit. And that's the best outfits, male or female. If you remember, there's a scene where Annette O'Toole, as Nolte is leaving, puts this sort of maroon scarf over him that just tops off that look.
Kill it.
And he sort of struts out onto the San Francisco streets looking like $1 million. $1 million sort of ruffled and covered in blood and sweat, but nonetheless.
Whiskey stained shirt.
Coffee. But nonetheless.
It's also waking up at 11:15 in the morning. Looks
the
great.
Shit.
Impeccable.
So in recognition of sterling work in that ensemble, it's kind of a classic look there. What are the best? What would else could be considered? Obviously, that is a great look. But there are quite a few.
Yeah, Murphy suits. They look really good.
Amazing. Is it wolf? What's the term for that pattern?
Wolf's teeth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it like
houndstooth? Wolf's teeth.
Houndstooth.
Yeah. I'm starting my own brand called Wolf's Teeth. That's
beautiful.
Why I said that. Yeah.
Beautiful suit. Also, I'm partial to Sonny Landham's leather pants. Not many people can pull off leather pants.
You look good in them. I like them right now.
The ones I'm wearing now are the ones from Last Boy Scout.
Yeah.
They're worth $800.
Yeah.
Leather pants, a white shirt unbuttoned to like the midriff, and a leather jacket.
It's my Halloween costume.
But Sonny Landham pulls that off like nobody's business.
Well, he's so built. He's so well built. Mine is, for your more casual look, it is David Patrick Kelly's green shirt with the little patches on the shoulders, the like kind of military style shirt, and the jacket over that, and the jeans. Like
that's very you.
That's
like your tones.
Yeah, those are my tones. It's a slim guy fit. I wish I had. I'd like kill for that. I love that little outfit that he has.
This is a stylish, well-dressed movie.
Oh yeah, I think all of Walter Hill's movies are that aren't aliens.
This is it's just a fun thing to look at with these things, because some of them are very of their time and some of them are kind of timeless.
Yeah, Riggs's fits and Lethal Weapon, man. Those red button-down shirts, the patterned fleet. Oh my god. Anyway,
some good looks. Also, shout out to I'm going to cite the name of the performer. The two ladies in that are in Chinatown.
Oh, okay.
Margot Rose as Casey and Denise Crosby as Sally. Denise Crosby, I believe, was in Miracle Mile, another movie
She's been in a lot of movies.
The chick with the baseball jersey, like kind of like it Elks, like that's that's pretty hot.
Yeah, that does it.
It's like,
that's
a cool.
I'm
that's
quiet
a cool
over
look,
here. Is it hot in this room?
Yeah, and I was trying to. What team is that? The Elks? It must be some minor league team.
I just love it.
Anyway, the Reggie Hammond Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. So this is a slight crossover award.
Right.
In Die Hard on a Blank, we have the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. But of course, Reggie Hammond is also a very skilled thief, as we discover in the finale. Obviously, Eddie Murphy steals this film.
It's Eddie. It's,
okay.
He stole the 80s.
But is there anyone else here, without stepping on our next category?
Yeah.
Who did a lot with a little for you?
I'll tell you, Brian
James?
Brian James, great, just
Keo?
very, very distinct. It's funny because I'm always forever going to think of him as Leon.
Of course, same year.
Yeah,
that
same
movie
year.
came out.
Well,
Blade Runner, 1982.
So it's nice to see him, and I don't think if he steals it, but I think his name should be said.
Well, he ends up becoming a prominent figure in the sequel.
That's right, he does. I did know that.
And he pops up in a bunch of these movies. We'll see him again in Tango and Cash with an atrocious Cockney accent.
Right. Oh my God, yeah.
And he's, we saw him, we're not doing it on this one, but we did Striking Distance, where he's like he makes Jack Cates look like the nicest guy in the world.
I like Brian James a lot.
Great actor.
Yeah. What do you mean I'm not helping? But no, I don't think he steals the movie. It's Eddie Murphy's. The award goes to Eddie Murphy.
Yes, agreed.
So,
our next category is this is another one I'm excited about. The David Patrick Kelly Award for Most Valuable Weasel. This is a genre where we're going to see a lot of weaselly characters. They might be an informant. They might be, they're a snitch. They're some kind of intermediary. They're a sleazy lawyer.
Launder money for South African diplomats who are also drug dealers.
Exactly. We've got this Lethal Weapon's got some great ones. But something to look out for. David Patrick Kelly, by the way, we love him, and not just for the fact that he has, he plays these like weaselly characters in these cool films that we love. We talked about how legit incredible he is in Last Man Standing.
He's amazing
as kind of the main villain, and put it this way, like he blows Christopher Walken off the screen.
He steals the movie from Christopher Walken.
That is no mean feat. We think he is a spectacular actor, not just like he's just fun for his 10 minutes before Arnie throws him off the cliff. We really do love him.
He's a good actor.
And respect him tremendously. That said, he is also a great weasel.
Well, and I think he also, in a decade that's known for these kind of archetypes, he kind of created a great one. You know, so it's like the other thing about these parts is that like these guys didn't just create good roles in movies. They created characters that like resonate forever. So, and I even think you can see a little bit of like the DNA of this in Die Hard with a Vengeance, right? Like I was thinking about that a little bit, the kind of like mismatched pairing, all these movies.
That's definitely a buddy movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. Is it on the list?
It's not, but I think we covered it pretty extensively.
Wow, that was a short episode.
But I do wonder whether we should do Last Boy Scout again, because we looked at it through a different prism, but to be continued. Were there any other weasels that caught your eye beyond David Patrick? But by the way, this is the actor who plays Luther and is most well remembered for his role in The Warriors, also playing a character called Luther.
Yeah. The other weasel I would say is the white trash redneck who's on parole who tries to run out of the bar.
Good shout.
And Eddie Murphy's like, sit the fuck down. That would be my other pick for a weasel. Yeah.
Great call.
That's kind of it. Yeah, I was looking for a weasel in that bar scene, and there were quite a few around.
Good call. Love that. This will be another one that we'll maybe play with for the future. The Annette O'Toole Award for Best Female Performance with an Underwritten Character. It could do with some work.
I love Annette O'Toole in this movie.
She's brilliant.
She's really, really good.
She doesn't. She has so little to do.
Yeah,
and is given.
She just has to complain.
But she's so great. I saw her in a play in New York.
What play?
It was called Kindness by Adam Rapp.
Oh, Adam Rapp.
Very dark. And she was excellent. And of course, I remember her fondly from Superman 3.
Yes.
Which I think came out.
Oh my God, Superman. Is that the one with Richard Pryor?
It is.
Yeah. Yep.
Here's my hot take. This is going to get me cancelled. I love Superman 3. I love that movie, and I rewatched it recently. It's like a kids film. It's like I watched it as a kid, and I think it's
a hotter take.
Delightful.
I have a hotter take about Superman. I love Superman Returns.
Ooh,
I really do.
Okay.
I'm not going to sit here and defend everyone in that movie,
nope.
But I will say that I found it. The attempt to do I love the Donner Supermans.
Oh, me too.
And I found the attempt to do that again incredibly moving.
Right.
And I think there's something arch and comic booky about like Spacey's performance and Parker Posey's performance in that movie. I like it. I think it's
it has its moments.
The original trailer
yeah.
for that movie is like mind blowing to me.
Has some interesting stuff.
But I like I don't know what's worse, liking Superman 3 or liking Superman Returns.
Were there any other female characters that caught your eye in this movie?
Yeah, because they're all naked. No, but I think that the roommates are really good, and I like that they're kind of tough. You know, Walter Hill explores everything in this movie through toughness.
Yeah.
Toughness is a virtue to him, right? And like, I'm not saying that he loves Cates' character, but I think he loves about Cates is he's just this guy that goes through the world pissed off all the time. Like, I think that's a kind of a trait that Walter Hill's attracted to in his storytelling, right? And so I like that. Maybe he makes Annette O'Toole tough as well, right?
Yeah.
So like the one sort of, yes, they're all underwritten, but the positive thing you could say about them is they're all tough. Like they don't take shit.
Yes.
And I do think that that's a good element of their characters.
I want to give a shout out to Olivia Brown, who plays Candy, who is the girl that Eddie Murphy's trying to get with in Romans.
Yes.
And I think eventually he does get with her, doesn't he, right?
Yeah, they go sleep together.
So Olivia Brown would go on to become a series regular in Miami Vice as one of the two female detectives that work regularly with Crockett and Tubbs, and went on to do some great stuff.
Yeah.
So
she's good. She's got limited screen time.
She doesn't have too much to do, and I feel bad for her because he isn't very nice to her. He's not very romantic in the way he tries to woo her.
But then they have a good time together.
They seem to work it out.
It's It's actually another nice moment at the end when he's leaving. And he's like, "I'll be out in 6 months. Let's have a good time together." You're like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Reggie Hammond might actually be like a vulnerable guy.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the movie.
Somehow I doubt it, but yeah.
Yeah. But maybe. I'm just looking for the best. I'm just looking for the best.
And our last two, I say we're sort of playing around with these, but the Roxanne Award for Best Musical Moment.
Hey, that was good.
Be it diegetic or non-diegetic. Because this is actually a great musical movie.
Yeah.
There's a few and it's another Walter Hill thing. You'll see a lot of, first of all, he's got great taste in composers.
Yeah.
Whether it's James Horner or Ry Cooder or, the James Horner score.
I kind of forgot that Ry Cooder did the Last Man Standing score, right?
And did Streets of Fire as well.
Right.
And Streets of Fire is a full-on musical,
yeah.
Essentially. It doesn't have characters breaking into song and dance routines,
right.
but it's about the musical world. It has two phenomenal banger tunes that bookend the movie, and it's all Jim Steinman stuff. So I think Walter Hill music is an important part of the mix, and that long sequence in Vromans.
Yeah, I would say it's that. I would go with the Vroman scene as my.
Is that the busboys in the movie, or
it
is
might
that another?
Be. I didn't look it up.
I'm not sure.
What a great cue to end that movie, too.
Yeah, the boys are back in town.
Yeah, that's a great ending. I think that's really good. I think the Vroman sequence is really good. I also just want to give a shout out again to the James Horner score. It's outrageous.
Sublime.
And it's so stylistically daring. It goes all over the place.
It's kind of avant-garde in a weird way.
You're like, is that steel drum? Like, what are we doing here?
Yet completely
heavy action movie stuff.
Oh, it's just so stylish.
Yeah, I like that these movies, Lethal Weapon with the saxophone, like the non-orchestral, so to speak, nature of these scores is really fascinating.
Well, again, I think it's kind of we're moving into the era of MTV.
Yeah,
and that is having an influence on mainstream studio movies, and I'm here for it.
Yeah,
I love it because music is such an important part of the mix, and like Lethal Weapon has like Eric Clapton,
and he does all the guitar solos for 3.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Our final category is the best gratuitous nude scene, of which you will find plenty in these movies. And I will say this was my wife's idea for a category.
That's a great category. Shout out Darlene for the idea, because it needs to be acknowledged.
It's. I mean, all of these movies seem to feature a scene where two yahoos are crashing through the doors of motels,
right,
where people are always
just
fucking
naked.
And often Red Heat has this scene where it's like there's a couple of sex workers in this motel, and there's a big shootout going on.
Right,
and people
right,
are
right.
bashing through the doors to reveal a woman like who clutches her breasts a moment too late.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's kind
just
of
such a trope.
Kind of a condition. I would go with the early scene of the prostitute being like, "This isn't my plan for life."
But even wildly, that's kind of Cassavetes-esque in some ways. It's like a little bit bit of naturalism. Like she's got a character, she's sort of working through some stuff.
It's a little self-deception-y too, which is
it's kind of weirdly. I don't want to say dimensional, but at least she gets a bit of dialogue. At least
totally.
she gets a
it
character.
Helps establishes that this guy doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
There is an element where there's a little too much offering of money for sex in this movie. Like maybe there may be just a little bit too much. Even Murphy's like, take $10, and she's like,
yeah,
I'm not a prostitute.
Yeah.
It's fine. It is of the
era.
era.
It's a Walter Hill Western trope of just like transactional sex workers. It's just like it happens a lot in these movies for better or worse.
Totally.
But some elements of this film have dated wonderfully. Some of them have dated a little less so. But regardless, to me, this is like a pretty unassailable masterpiece.
Yeah, it really works, especially on for me, I should say, on a second viewing. The first time I was like, oh, that's really good. I think the first time I was really obsessed with seeing sort of the how the pieces fit into the larger genre. And in watching it the second time, I think I was more absorbed by the characters. I was more like present for that kind of stuff. And like, I also just have to say, full credit for not making characters likable just for the sake of making them likable.
I heard a great quote about this recently from Tarantino, and it was on his podcast, and Roger Avery's daughter, whose name escapes me, Gala, thank you,
yeah,
who's great on their show, was talking. I think it was either the Keep or the Relic, because they did a great doubleheader on that. And she was saying something about a character being likable, and Quentin goes, "What is this likable shit?
Yeah.
Like, what does it matter if they're likable? Are they interesting?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to take that. I'm going to keep for my own work as well."
Yeah.
Right, because there is such an obsession with, I think, cookie cutter studio thinking.
Yeah.
Of like, how do you make this character likable? But it's the better question is, are they interesting?
I mean, one of the biggest pieces of shit in movie history is Vincent Vega.
Oh, he's the worst.
Awful. And yet you're still like,
him.
Yeah, you love him. And I think the thing that's interesting is that Jules is likable. Despite being a murderer,
right.
Jules changes over the course of Pulp Fiction. Vincent Vega does not.
Vincent Vega is a objectively terrible human being.
Yeah. He's
but
awful.
you love him.
Yeah.
You love him.
He
is interesting.
I think a lot of it, not only, to get simpler about it correlates to screen time. I think we're just built into the model of like, if I'm watching someone do things on screen after a certain amount of time, I may not like them, but I can empathize with them, or I can exist in their reality, right? I think
just find them compelling. As Popeye Doyle is not likable, but he's eminently compelling to watch.
Yeah, well, hack.
It's just likability is I think overrated.
Because you mentioned The French Connection, and I think it's a precursor to this genre. Can I throw out another movie that I think is a great buddy movie from the late 70s that not enough people have seen? Gloria, directed by John Cassavetes, starring, I think it's late 70s, starring Jenna Rowlands, where she takes a young boy who lives in an apartment under her wing because he's killed by drug dealers, and she decides to like save him. And it's like their whole dynamic, because he's this like very gregarious little boy, is like they begin like they hate each other and then by the end of the movie, she basically takes him in. They like fall in love. It's just like a great precursor.
I want to say that's 1980, but
maybe it is 1980. I could stand to be corrected. Have you seen it?
I haven't. But I know they remade it with Sharon Stone, didn't they?
They did, and I've actually never seen the remake. But the original is one of these like, I think that like people do, I don't. Cassavetes is not known for this, but between Killing of a Chinese Bookie and Gloria, you can see the kind of like adult thriller start to emerge from those, the kind of modern adult thriller emerge from those movies. I think you could see it all in those movies. Yeah, this movie rules.
Any final thoughts before we wrap things up and talk about, what's coming next.
One little thing is just Murphy's entrance in this movie is unassailably great. The Roxanne, like singing the song, it's just so funny, and it's just such a great entrance.
Off screen, and
Yeah.
it's 25 minutes in.
Yeah, he's only in the movie for an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And he walks away with it.
Absolutely amazing.
So that's yeah, I actually timed it out last night. I was like, we're 27 minutes into this movie.
And that's the only bit that's overtly comedic. Up
Yeah.
until that point, apart from the odd
You're watching a
amusing
gritty
line.
police drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, where two cops just got like murdered by this escaped
Yeah.
nutcase.
It's sadistically so.
You
He
know?
didn't have to kill them.
Yeah.
Yeah, he could have just walked away.
So, great stuff. We love this movie. We're excited to take you on this adventure. The next movie on the show, on the 48 Hours feed, will be Lethal Weapon, our Christmas holiday special crossover, Die Hard on a Blank / 48 Hours. That's going to be coming out in 2 weeks
On the Die Hard on a
Blank
feed.
feed.
Yes.
Coming in January on this feed, on the 48 Hours feed, will be Beverly Hills Cop and To Live and Die in LA.
Woo!
So we need you guys, if you want to get those episodes. This is exclusively for subscribers. Can you explain a bit about
Yes.
how that will work? And
So the way it works is that you will go to the link, which is patreon.com / 48 hours of buddy movies. And it'll be in the show notes, and you'll be able to sign up. You give us $5 a month. You get 2 episodes a month. You give us $7 a month. You get the episodes. You also get a shout out on the main feed. We'll thank you on the feed for coming and doing the show.
Cool.
Those are the two. Very simple. That's how it works. It'll be a separate RSS feed. My advice to you, if I can say, is to use your computer and not your Apple app to sign up for it, because Apple charges you more money. So a way to save your money is to go on your computer and sign up through Patreon.
And the link again was
patreon.com / 48 hours of buddy movies.
patreon.com / 48 hours of buddy movies. And it's the number, not the
Yes, it is
right.
the number. I'll put it in the link so everybody can see it.
So please, because that's the only, as of at the end of this month, we're going to give you, because we're generous and it's because it's Christmas and it's the time for giving, we're giving you
Ho, ho,
2
ho.
episodes free, which is this one, 48 hours, and Lethal Weapon, so you can
Which will be
try
the first
before you
2
buy.
episodes,
That'll be
yes.
the first 2 episodes. But thereafter, if you want to get movies like Beverly Hills Cop, To Live and Die in LA, Midnight Run, Stakeout, The Hard Way, Point Break, Harley Davidson, The Marlboro Man, Alien Nation, Tango and Cash, etc., etc., etc.
The Hard Way. Did you say that?
I did.
Okay, never mind.
You have to sign up and subscribe for that. It's exclusively for paid subscribers. Die Hard on a Blank will continue with its programming back on track from January, where we'll be doing Hard Rain.
Hard Rain?
And Deep Rising, the jet ski double bill.
Oh my God. It's
2
Die Hard and a creature feature.
2
The
fun
jet ski
movies.
double bill.
Yep.
These are great January movies because they're a little smaller, a little under the radar.
Yeah.
And then our third movie
Less
after that,
holiday themed
very
and so
exciting.
forth.
Yes.
But look out for 2 weeks from now where we do Lethal Weapon as a special Christmas crossover.
Ho, ho, ho. Motherfuckers.
Now, I thought you were going to do
Oh,
Now
yeah.
I Have a Machine
Yeah,
Gun.
I don't know why I was thinking, what would...
Ho, ho, ho.
It's goddamn Christmas! There it is. We got it. Thanks, everybody.